With us today, we have the Athletics Manchester City correspondent Sam Lee, plus our senior writer Rory Smith, who makes his athletic debut on the podcast today. Rory, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Sam, let's start with you on this one. I think I've probably seen more of you over the last few weeks than I have all of
Yeah,
last
man.
season. But look, this is an interesting one, especially Bernardo Silva's comment saying City played like under 15s as they gave up, obviously, the late lead and ended up losing 2-1 against Manchester United on Sunday. I mean, what are your thoughts on what he said there?
Well, it kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with Thierry Henry when he analysed the goal on Monday Night Football, which is on Sky Sports in the UK, and he was like showing Grealish, and he was like, why has he gone backwards?" And then he was like, "Why has his pass gone backwards? Why has his pass gone backwards?" It's like, but you must know, like they've got no confidence whatsoever. Like the whole Guardiola blueprint, that the whole idea of keeping the ball as far away from your goal as possible so you're safe, is based on like being brave and playing forward and yeah, just that courage to play. And they obviously haven't got it. And I think the closer they got to, oh shit, we might actually do it. We might actually do it. They just didn't really. It's when Guardiola first came, they beat Monaco 5-3 in the first leg of a Champions League game. Went to Monaco and they had that old mentality of we're 2 goals up, we're just going to sit back. Now that is completely the opposite to what Guardiola wants, isn't it? Because then you're just inviting trouble. And even when City managed to score that night, I think they were 1-0 down. I think they managed to equalise. They sat back again. And he was just like, what is going on? They just keep sitting back. And I think it was almost that same mindset on Sunday. They had something to hold on to, but because they're so fragile, because of all the recent results and setbacks, they didn't have this proactive way of playing. They went back into we've got something to hold on to. Like let's be uber safe. But ironically, the more you play like that, the more you play back towards your own goal, and we saw what happened afterwards. So I think that must have been what Bernardo was talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Rory, look, the headline really is, one win in 11 for Guardiola's side. It's kind of unfathomable at this moment in time to think that in many respects, based on what he's achieved over the last few years. But in terms of the league table, though, they're still in the race or semi in the race. What is it? 9 points behind league leaders, Liverpool 7 behind Chelsea. I think 3 points behind Arsenal in fifth. I mean, yes, on all fronts, it looks pretty awful for Guardiola's side. But I mean, that's what if they win 3 games straight and Liverpool drop points, it's not too unfathomable to see them float up the league table, surely.
Yeah, Liverpool are having the common decency to wait for them, which is really, I think, really kind. The problem City have got in terms of winning the league is that you need 3 teams to collapse, and one team collapsing always possible. 2, maybe. 3, it's unlikely. And you certainly the form Chelsea are in, the fact that Arsenal with Odegaard back, I know they've had a couple of sort of slip ups recently, but Arsenal look like a team capable of putting a run together. I think that's probably fair to say. It's probably this is the thing. It's City, so if it was anybody else, you'd say, look, yeah, they are probably now out of the title race. If it was Arsenal who'd had this run, you'd be like, yeah, fine, that's them done for the lead this year, but they can still get the top 4. Because it's City, you can't. I don't really want to say they definitely won't win the league,
Yeah.
but as Sam has sort of made clear in his reporting over the last few weeks, if you look at the kind of structural issues, whether that's injury or the size of the squad or whatever it might be, it's very hard to see City putting together the sort of run they'd need to put together to overhaul all 3 teams. Maybe 1, maybe 2, but all 3 I think is unlikely.
Yeah, Sam, we keep saying it, because it is City, you can't write them off. But as we're seeing with what seems like a really unsavory trend at the moment for this team, those defeats just keep happening. But also, we talk about injuries. We also talk about a team that's really lacking in confidence. Where do you see them building confidence back up? That Derby game would have been a wonderful opportunity to seal off a game and see an upward curve.
Yeah. I don't hold out much hope for the Villa away game because Villa have had their own struggles, but maybe the fact that because Villa have had a bit of a struggle, if City can do something there, and I can't, I wouldn't, if City had won the derby at the weekend, it wouldn't have been a good performance. We watched it, And up until 87, 88 minutes, we thought, well, they're going to win this match, but not be brilliant. So maybe they could do something like that against Villa. And then, they've got Everton after Christmas and Leicester away. And you can see potential there. But I don't know. I'm sure it will turn around. And I think they'll probably get top four and be all right come the end of the season. But I don't know exactly when that turnaround is going to come because there's just no respite. Like when they beat Forest, which was 2 weeks ago, and they looked pretty good. It was okay. So what's going to go from here? And then in the second half, Akanji and Ake got injured, and you think, well, never actually mind the result and that good stuff because there's now no wiggle room in the back line. And then even in the midfield, it's like, okay, well, who plays against Crystal Palace and who plays against Juventus? Then who plays in the derby? And the answer was just like they'd all just keep playing, despite the fact that Walker, Gvardiol, Lewis, and he got banned anyway, Gundogan, Bernardo, De Bruyne. They've not been playing great, and they're just playing. So it's just this cycle, and they're still in that. Unless Akanji comes back, that would help. They're still going to have the same kind of physical exhaustion. Mentally, God knows where they're at. So I'm sure it will turn around and be like relatively okay, but I honestly don't know when. Like I say, the fixtures over the next couple of weeks are okay, but then in January it gets quite horrible again. So they will need to find something by then.
What's been really like interesting, I think, is that there have been moments where you thought, okay, that is the thing they need. So, and Sam's right, like the emotional and the psychological and the physical fatigue isn't going to go away. But they beat Forest, and you think, okay, that is. I think there was a podcast or an article somewhere that said, are City now back? And you think, yeah, often what happens is a really good team, a sort of generation-defining team in City's case, have a bad run, they get a win, and everything just kind of clicks back into gear. And even in the derby, they score a goal that Guardiola himself clearly thought was quite fluky. And you think maybe that's what you need in that moment. You need the one, like the proverbial goal that goes in off someone's backside is kind of the way you break a bad run of form. And then that doesn't work either. So Sam's right, like they're not going to sort of not win any more games between now and May. They will probably beat Everton, they'll probably beat Leicester, they might beat Villa. They will put runs together where they win more games than they lose, and I think they'll get top four quite easily. But something has gone in City, and I think it might even be the confidence that Sam was talking about at the start that I don't know how you get that back. Not least as there's two kind of things involved. It's not just how City feel about themselves; it's how the opponents feel about Manchester City. That kind of aura is really difficult to recover. It doesn't come back in a few weeks, and I think it probably doesn't come back in a few months. If City, have a good January, February, March, in April there'll still be teams going to the Etihad thinking these are vulnerable, and that's not happened for a long time.
I think if City were to start getting back and they win 3 games in a row, everyone's going to be like, okay, we better hold off. But now I think they go, we can really get at these. But I think if City were to say string a few results together over the next few weeks, I think teams will go, okay, hold on a minute. Or even like you said, if it's February, March, April, by that point, I think teams will be like, oh yeah, we had our chance, but it's not now.
Yeah, you might be right that if they, maybe it depends on the performances. If they stuff Everton and stuff Leicester, then teams will be
and then
like,
lose to West Ham, then there's obviously still instability there. Yeah, sure.
Well, Rory, I want to ask you about something you've written about, knowing when to say goodbye to aging stars, and that's out on The Athletic. And, you look at City's squad with players like De Bruyne, 33 years old, Gundogan, 34, Walker, 34 as well. Do you think they've missed a trick in not sort of adding a bit more youthful impetus to that team to guard them against what we are seeing right now? Not to say those players aren't good, but it's fair to say 2 of those players at least aren't at their optimum this season.
Yeah, I think they've fallen in to an extent into the trap that a lot of really successful teams fall into, which is not necessarily wanting to see things they don't want to see. They will have known, obviously, it's not a surprise to Man City that Kevin De Bruyne is 33. They're not, oh my God, have you seen how old Kevin De Bruyne is? And same with Walker. Gundogan is a slightly different case. They brought him back as cover, and then because of the injuries, he's probably had to play
played a lot more football,
than anybody thought he would. And there's no question that having Ilkay around is a good thing for kind of morale in the dressing room, and he's a leader, he's a senior figure. There are non-footballing benefits to the presence of Ilkay Gundogan. I think they've found it difficult to know when to make the big calls. They're not the first, and they won't be the last successful team to do this. They have not been willing to maybe look reality in the face early. I think the really successful transitions are managed by spotting things early, and maybe you lose 6 months where it looks like a mistake, but 6 months after that you realise that you made the right call because the replacement's bedded in. But the other thing that I think City, there are question marks over City, is their recruitment. The players they have signed, I think, have not worked with the regularity, the consistency that they did 2, 3, 4 years ago. And I mean, the one who is most newsworthy at the moment, I suppose, is Mateus Nunes. It's not just that Nunes hasn't really shone at Manchester City. It's the fact that they could have signed someone who would have done. It was a weird deal at the time, and it doesn't look anything less than a weird deal now. Savinho, I think, maybe makes sense, but perhaps he's a little bit less ready than they expected. And the other thing is that's really struck me is Guardiola's always liked to work with a small squad. He seems to have distilled that down into its core essence this year. Letting Julian Alvarez leave, he obviously wanted to go and play regularly, but he was the player who played the most minutes for Manchester City last season. You let him leave and don't replace him, even if you're looking at Oscar Bob and thinking he can step in. That's a big ask for a young, relatively inexperienced player. I wonder whether the first step in kind of City getting back to where they were will perhaps be to extend the number of players that Pep Guardiola wants to work with on a regular basis to. I mean, I don't know what Sam would estimate it as. I'd have said seems to like about 20, maybe not even that many senior outfield players.
No, less.
You maybe think
17, 18. He said the other day on Friday, he said, this period's made me realise maybe we need to work with the 25 for these man squad. And all the City fans were like, oh my God, finally. But
it's only taken up 7 years.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know why there's such like an oh my God, finally reaction to it. It's like, yeah, but that approach has been one of like fundamentals of winning all these trophies and playing all this great football. So it's probably one of the reasons now, combined with all the bad luck with injuries and stuff, and letting the squad maybe get to a point where it's not fresh enough. But the small squad thing in and of itself, clearly not a problem over the course of his time at City. But yeah, he has acknowledged that he's thinking about that now. But then when he mentioned that in the open bit of the press conference on Friday, but then in the embargoed section, where he generally gives longer answers. And Friday was the day when City brought out their annual report and like record revenues and stuff like that. And he goes, so maybe it's time to have 25, 30 players like Chelsea have. But he was like, but if we do that, then there's no revenues. And it's kind of like, is he, like, it doesn't strike me as something he's actually going to do or that City will actually do. Maybe it's necessary, but like, they're not going to get up to 25 players from the 17, 18 or so that they've got now.
Well, not least, if you do that, you're talking major surgery. Because I think the likelihood is that you see, and you will know this a lot better than I do, you'd expect 3 or 4 to go in the summer, the older ones particularly. Maybe someone like Bernardo even, who's been there a long time. There might be a sense that, I mean, he's been there a long time and tried to leave quite a lot. But
Yes.
there's maybe a point where you look at Bernardo and say, okay, look, you've been brilliant. You would still be a brilliant player for us, but we are going to go in this new direction. If you're then adding a further 6 or 7 players onto that, you're suddenly looking at a kind of 10-player transfer window. City won't do that.
They should start triggering all the buyback clauses in their amazing young players that have been sold.
I think there is a world in which Guardiola might be persuadable to get up to 21, 22. I don't think you have to go 24, 25. But I do think it's an interesting subject whether Chelsea have, and I would guess it's accidental, but it might not be, whether Chelsea have worked out that with this expanded calendar, you need to change the number of players you have in your squad. You effectively need to be running 2 teams, which is at odds with what a lot of elite managers want. A lot of managers don't want to have those numbers of players because it's hard to keep them all happy. It's hard to keep them all fresh. It's hard to kind of get your message into that many players, which is why Guardiola wants that smaller squad. But maybe the Chelsea madness has some method to it.
Well, let's move on. because we've identified City's problems now, and as you mentioned earlier, Sam, let's dig a little deeper on how Pep and the club fix the issues at hand. Rory Gundogan recently outlined the tactical problems with City at the moment. He said, at the moment, it just feels like every attack we concede is just so dangerous, and I have the feeling sometimes we're a bit careless in the duels. He also said that we give them counter attacks and we have to chase back 50, 60 meters. That's not what we are built for. We are built for possession. I'm fascinated by that last sentence. That's not what we're built for. Often, I guess the criticism of some of Guardiola's teams is that it can be semi-mechanical. So to be built for something and not being functioning at this moment in time is quite interesting. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I've been really struck actually by how many City players have come out and publicly said, this isn't working, we look really vulnerable, we're incredibly fragile, I don't know how to solve it. It's quite unusual for players at any team to talk like that, I think. And it's actually quite a good illustration of how deep-rooted the issues at City are. Sam's summed it up better than I can, but City are built, and I think that is the right word, to play in a certain way, to dominate the game and to compress space. They are not designed to have one of those kind of harem-scarum frenetic styles that, I don't know, Klopp's Liverpool, where it's kind of everybody charge this way, then everybody charge that way, then everyone charge that way. And they're both completely valid styles and they can both be incredibly successful. But City's playing squad doesn't really lend itself to that, partly through age now, I think, and partly through the sheer number of games that they've played in the last 3-4 years, which is a factor as well. But also because that's not what Guardiola wants his games to look like. He doesn't want his team to do that. He wants them to have the ball and he wants them to deny the opposition any sort of space. What's happened is that basically because of the injuries, because of the vulnerabilities that have been introduced, City are now being forced to play games that they don't want to play. And they're not as good at doing it as they are at playing the way that they do want to play. And that makes sense. How you solve that, Sam's right to say that once the injured players start coming back, that will help. I guess the problem that Pep has is that as he's waiting for Akanji and Ake to come back, he's asking an awful lot of, say, Ruben Dias. So
yeah, it's a loop, isn't it?
What's to say that Akanji comes back and then 2 weeks later Ruben Dias does a hamstring?
Yeah.
And that is the problem with fatigue, and it's the problem with exhaustion. So whether there is a point, maybe, I mean, yeah, realistically there probably will be, like March, say, everyone will be back for City, and it wouldn't be a shock if City won 7 games on the spin, March to May or something. And to be honest, it wouldn't be a massive shock if they won the Champions League, because that would be roughly the right time for everyone to be coming back. But in terms of the tactical, the way it's gone wrong tactically, I think that the situation around City has basically allowed opponents to stop City doing what City want to do and to start doing what they want to do. And it's probably the first time in 7 years that that's happened.
Yeah. Sam, as we're talking about potentially extending this squad, I'm wondering whether or not City do business in January. We talk about having to rotate this squad that's just literally coming back off injury and you're throwing them back on the field. And, you mentioned recently that the club announced club record revenues of £715 million in their latest annual accounts, alongside profits of £73.8 million. Is it as easy as saying, grab a few players in January and all our problems are solved? I mean, it's much more complex than that, surely.
Yeah, especially because we always say that City players need a season to bed in. So bringing them in January is probably it won't necessarily help. But yeah, in terms of that, so the thing is, so Rodri's going to be out for the season, so we know that. So even if everyone else comes back in, they'll still have a bit of fragility in the middle, in the sense that without Rodri, they don't really have the mobility or the legs. We saw that in like October when they got that last minute winner at Wolves. They weren't massively convincing. They beat Fulham, but they gave up 3 huge chances on the break, all to Adama Traore. And you just think, they look a bit unstable. And then obviously you take the extra injuries, then it unravels to this extent. So even with everybody back, there will still be that fragility there. So if they were to start making steps towards fixing that in the transfer market, and like Rory mentioned, with some of the players who might move on in the summer, if you can kickstart that process now, if you can add a bit of fresh blood, because look, at this point, the defeats themselves are standout, but like the 3-3 draw against Feyenoord when you're 3-0 up with 15 minutes to go, that would have been the one where it was like, what is going on? And then obviously United the other day, United weren't great in the game either. It was just a poor game. And like I said earlier, I was kind of processing a very kind of below average City win. But then they couldn't even hold on to that. So the emotional damage of that, if you can fix that by bringing in some fresh faces as well, then yeah, I think it's not the only solution to buy players in January, but it's definitely a good one. And like if it doesn't happen in January, then it's going to have to happen in the summer, because as well as those accounts you mentioned with those figures, last year they made 139 million in like profit from selling players. In terms of like their net spend was that, and those accounts were submitted before they sold Alvarez and João Cancelo for about £100 million between them. And then over the last 5 years, they've brought in 405 million from player sales. So in terms of PSR and whether they can spend, they can. And are they ready to? Like from what I've heard, yes, they are. Now they've just got to go out and find the players and make sure they settle in straight away.
Yeah, it is that
Easy.
sort of. I reckon Rory's just finishing top four. I don't know whether or not City are aiming for the league this season, but bringing players in January, getting them to hit the ground running. I mean, I don't know many players that really do that, especially for a team at this level. I mean, that's a solution, but I mean, it's much deeper than that, surely.
I think it is, and you need. There's no question that in the summer you'll see the sort of churn at City that we've not really been used to over the last 5 years, something like that. There's been a fairly, the squad's been pretty constant. They've added a couple in the summer, but nothing major. A lot of the deals, the ones that have worked, have been. Kovacic was a relatively low profile transfer. It kind of everyone sort of. One day Mateo Kovacic played for Chelsea, the next day played for Man City, and everyone sort of went, yeah, all right, fair enough. Mateo Kovacic now plays for Man City. I think that there will be a lot of activity in the summer. I'd be standard if there's not, in terms of, Walker, De Bruyne. You maybe keep Gundogan around as what he was meant to be, which was a kind of a reserve and an influence in the dressing room. There might be others that they decide to
Edison.
move on. Yeah, Edison possibly. There's been long-standing interest in Saudi and Edison. It may well be that even someone like Diaz might, someone like that. I mean, Diaz isn't old, but if you're reshaping,
for me Diaz would be the one they'd keep.
Yeah, that may well be, but
Stones maybe because of the injuries.
Yeah, possibly. But you may well see sort of 3 or 4 older ones, and then 1 or 2 slightly surprising bigger names go, and that means you're going to end up signing 5, 6, 7 players. But I think if you can get ahead of that in January, and if there are players that you want, who you're interested in, and you think, okay, let's get them in, even if they don't hit the ground running in terms of giving their absolute best, fitting into the team perfectly, then there are benefits to doing it. Liverpool actually have a relatively good run of signings in January. Luis Diaz was a January signing, and that the first 6 months, his performances were a little bit up and down, but he gave the team a real kind of injection of energy. I think there is a value to that. But also in City's case, it's just that renewed sense of competition, that idea of the reinforcements arriving, giving players a break, that sense of new things are happening, I think is really valuable. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if City signed fewer than 2 players in January, to be perfectly honest. It would strike me that a midfielder possibly. I mean, a midfielder is a safe bet because ultimately Rodri's not coming back before next season. So you need an extra body in there, and it makes sense to sign a midfielder. I don't know whether Sam would go for a forward or a defender. I guess it depends a little bit on Oscar Bob. Just City definitely kind of regard him as, they saw him as Alvarez's replacement, and losing him early on, in fact before the season started, I think made very little impact outside Man City, but within Man City was seen as quite significant. So whether you wait for him, I don't know, and go and sign an extra body in defence. If there are players that City are interested in, and they will have a list of players.
They will do, exactly. I was going to say that, yeah. They'll be looking at some.
And you see a couple that you think, okay, look, we can, even for a little bit of a premium, we can go and get him now, then I think now's probably the time to do it. The one complication with City, the big cloud hanging over everything, I do wonder to what extent players are asking the question, what happens if you're found guilty of the charges? I think that must... You'd be a bad agent if you weren't asking that question. And I wonder to what extent that complicates the transfer market for them. My guess is that all it means is you have to pay everybody a bit more money. That's normally the thing that solves problems in the transfer market. But I do wonder if that is something that is a factor, like a complicating factor for City.
Do you think that's true, Sam? That could be a complicating factor for players coming into the club.
I think we had to... I can't remember if we were just if we wrote an article about it a couple of months ago, or we were like just doing some groundwork for the whole charges related shebang that's going to kick off at some point. But I seem to recall, certainly from what I've heard, but what colleagues posted as well, it's just not really come up. Like agents, because my assumption was agents would be like, okay, what's going on? But apparently, yeah, it doesn't really come up. Obviously, City don't bring it up, and agents don't really ask because they just think, well, let's just get this deal.
Let's
Let's
get
just
the
get this
deal over
deal
the line,
sorted.
yeah.
Now, maybe there've been agents and players who haven't come to City because of that, but that hasn't come to our attention anyway.
I don't think players would not join City. Football's very short-sighted generally, and
Mm.
also City being expelled from the Premier League is a very, very distant possibility. Um, but I do wonder. Yeah, I don't think it would stop you coming, but I do wonder if it might make you ask for more money.
Right, let's move on. There was a comment from an Athletic reader, actually, gents. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, on a recent City piece, actually. And the comment read, "The longer this City crisis lasts, the more accolades you've got to give to Sir Alex, considering the way he managed transitioning of his teams multiple times over the period of 26 years." I mean, is that a fair comparison to make? Guardiola's won the Premier League 6 in the last 7 years, but also I'm just thinking about the spread of quality in the teams right now in the Premier League compared to Sir Alex's last season at Manchester United. I mean, where do you stand with that, Sam?
I'm just not sure. There's a. In the best possible way, I think it's irrelevant. Like, I don't know
Mm.
why one thing has to be the other because, yeah, this is a terrible run from City, but obviously we'll have to see where they finish. But you know, Ferguson's United. The thing is, we know Ferguson's achievements are amazing, and I'm not sure this adds anything extra to that because there was obviously periods, and it's fine because it was 26 years, but there was 3 years when United didn't win the league. Like it wasn't like Ferguson did amazing things, but you can't look at this run and then try and make them even better than they were. Like I think Ferguson's always going to get the accolades. And yeah, like he's known, isn't he, famously for like ruthlessly tearing up the squad.
Mm.
But there were periods where it didn't work. There were periods where they didn't win the league. Um, and there were periods where they had bad spells. Now, yeah, this particular spell has been horrific. But if City get to the end of the season and finish in the top four, it, if they to finish 10th, you could say, oh, well, Alex Ferguson never finished 10th. Well, fair enough. But as it stands at the moment, I don't know. Like what Guardiola's done has been amazing. This run at the moment is terrible. What Ferguson did was amazing, but he also had some periods which weren't great, and
I,
they're
Yes,
not too dissimilar to this. Not winning
Rory's
the league for
laughing
three
away
years.
there. Yeah, I can
yeah, I
see him
don't,
smiling. Go
I
on,
don't
Rory.
really know if is Alex Ferguson short of accolades. Is that a thing? Do people not praise Alex Ferguson? I think what Sam says about not like so. Well, number one, Fergie never did four in a row,
Mm.
did he?
Mm.
So maybe Ferguson's United did transition, but they did also have transitional seasons, and
Mm.
I think that it's probably fair in hindsight to say that yeah they had like a span of 3 years and then they tended to not take a year off but they dipped for a little bit and somebody else, whether it was Arsenal, Chelsea or whoever, Blackburn, kind of stood took their chance, and that was kind of the rhythm of it. And that's not a slight to Ferguson, who is the most successful manager in British history, but
Yeah,
he he wasn't. It wasn't the case that Fergie won every game for 26 years. There were, like Sam says, there were lean moments. There were periods where he didn't win the league. He tended to be quite close to winning the league, but it may well be the case that City are relatively close to winning the league this time around. They in the pandemic year, 2019-20, City had a dip. It wasn't as bad as this, but they did have a dip. They seem to have reached the end of kind of Guardiola City 1.0, and Liverpool took their chance that year. City didn't win the league, and it happens to all teams. It's happened in relatively spectacular fashion to City at the moment, but there are, as we talked about, like there are extenuating circumstances. The amount of injuries they are dealing with is not unprecedented, but it's fairly impressive. And so I don't know if it's anything. I mean, I suspect Fergie had periods like this, maybe not in exactly the same fashion, but it happens to all teams. It happens to all managers.
Mm. Sam, what have you made of how Pep has dealt with this situation as a whole. I mean, look, we've all seen scratches on the head and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
But, do you feel this is really taking a bit of a toll on him? Do you think it's had a bit of an impact on him as a person, not just a football manager?
Well, I don't know, because in a year's time, in 6 months' time, if he's not impacted by it, then no. But it's difficult at the moment, obviously. But it's like I was writing an article recently about, when he said, "Oh, well, he keeps saying, doesn't he? If I feel I'm going to be a problem, I'll leave, or the club might sack me, or whatever." And it's genuine. But all these things that he's saying, like for example, when he talks about his vulnerabilities and stuff, and when he's asked about scratching and whatever, yeah, he does say that. But at the same time, in the same press conferences, he's like incredibly defiant as well. He's talking about like he was asked on Friday, like, do you regret signing that new contract? He was like, no way. Like he goes, I wouldn't be able to sleep if I was leaving now. Like I need to stay and fix this. Like for like a certain, and look, don't get me wrong, he's a guy who kind of takes setbacks on the pitch very, let's say, emotionally. And this has been the case. Like, forget this period existed. We know that he's kind of dramatic and emotional and rubs his head and scratches his head and kicks his seat, whatever. This is what he's been like when his team are winning. So it's no surprise that it maybe goes a bit further now. But I think there's been like a kind of a certain image portrayed of this guy who's like cracking up. It's like, well, he's always said strange things for a start. He's always been emotional, like I've just said. But all these kind of pictures that are being painted do ignore all the defiant messages as well about I want to stay more than ever. I'm more determined than ever to come into work and find these solutions. He says he's not sleeping brilliantly. He slept better before, but he'd always just want to get into work and look at the other team and work out what the solutions are. And in that sense, he's the same. So, I mean, there's some logical conclusions. Like, is he going to be enjoying life as much as he was when they were winning? No, but when they were winning, do you think he was like kicking his heels down the street? He was going to be stressed about it. So I don't know. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't say he's taking it well or badly. I'll say he's taking it as expected. Like if things are that bad. Like when he says he's not good enough, it's because I think it's like, well, I'd love to have some solutions, but everything I try isn't working. But because the lads have got no legs, and I can't blame them because they're the only ones who I've got. So it is what it is. And then he just got to answer questions about it all the time.
And you get asked questions about it all the time as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of running out of things to say now. But at least I can have some time off over Christmas. Like, they're going to be losing again soon.
Yeah, I guess it's sometimes hard to remember he's actually a mere mortal like us, Rory. Well, I wouldn't say like us, but he's a mere mortal. But real talk, I've seen this knocking about where certain fans are talking about, probably time to part ways. He shouldn't have signed the deal. Could City part ways with Pep Guardiola? Surely that's, I don't even know why I'm asking you that question, but it's almost impossible, surely.
I think there probably is a point where you have to say that's the only available option if they were to still be in the midst of this sort of form. If it got to sort of 3 wins in 25 by March, then maybe you probably in that situation you probably have to consider it. But I don't think we'll get to that. So it remains in the realms of the hypothetical. It would be astonishing. I mean, genuinely astonishing for them to sack him. I don't think they would sack him, but I do wonder whether there might be a point if things got really, really, really bad, where there was a kind of conversation of, well, look, this is the only available option now because City can't be. Well, I mean, I suppose to an extent, as long as they were safe from relegation, City could probably tolerate it, and they're probably not far off safe from relegation already. So it might be that they say, look, actually, it doesn't matter as long as we finish 17th, then it's fine. As I say, I don't think it will come to this, and they'd be prepared to tolerate it. I think if they can't. Even if they find inconsistent form, 3 wins in 5 or something, as long as they can do something like that, I think that conversation never even needs to happen. If they really can't break the streak, then maybe you have to have it at some point. But I can't see it myself.
Right now, the problems now are the same problems as there were in the middle of November. There's nothing he can do with that squad because there's still players out. There's no rotation they can do. They're still knackered. They're more knackered than ever. They're more mentally drained and shot than ever. And the transfer window hasn't opened yet. If they start to get players back and they sign players and they're still losing, then maybe that's when Guardiola will be, oh, I'm not good enough. Like, it's gone completely. But let's be honest, do we imagine that things will be better if they get a couple of players and people return from injuries? That would be the only point to have that conversation, I think. Now it's like, well, the problems are the same problems as 6 weeks ago. So that, you hear that thing, oh, any other manager will be under pressure by now. It's like, well, do you want to work out why Guardiola isn't, for a start? But also not just because of his own achievements, but City aren't the kind of knee-jerk operation to be like, oh well, we're still losing, so what we're going to do? Like, the problems now are the same problems as the start of the run. Once things start to get better in that sense, if there's no improvement, then there might be that conversation. But I don't see why it would be now, because the problems are still there, and but worse than ever, really.
Can you see any glimmers of hope here, Sam? I'm just thinking, for the sake of balance, we've spent the entire podcast ripping apart what's going wrong with City, but can you offer fans listening to this any glimmer of hope, anything that's potentially, on the uprise for Manchester City, or where we can see them?
Well, I was asked
changing
this on
trajectory?
Friday, and I don't think it's a lost the dressing room situation. It's not one of those things where they're not running. Like, you can see in the games. Now the danger is now after the derby, maybe that last flicker's gone out, but you can see in games they're there, they're trying, they're doing what they need to do, despite all the setbacks, despite all the defeats. That Forest game when they won, they scored after like 7 or 8 minutes. Before that, I was like, this was a few days after the Liverpool game when they were like played off the pitch, pretty terrible. The Forest game comes back and it's like they're running, they're doing everything they need to do. The energy's there. Like, no matter how many times they've been knocked down, they keep going and doing what they need to do. And you think it's probably the minimum, but you can't take it for granted. And now, like I say, maybe after the United game and the way that's gone and how painful that will be, maybe that's going to be even harder to do. But I think the fact that they're willing and they're there and they're willing, it's not working at the moment, for all the reasons we just talked about. Basically, just lack of legs, I think, at this point, lack of freshness, mentality. But they're there and they're trying. And as long as they're trying, once you add in the other ingredients, like the players back from injury, maybe a couple of signings, that's where I think you see the hope. Like I think they'll finish in the top four. I did say a couple of weeks ago, I think they'll win the Champions League. In the last couple of weeks, I started to feel like, I don't know.
I mean,
but
where are they in the running? Are they?
But the thing is, if
playoffs,
they end up in a playoff, then that playoff's in February,
yeah,
and surely it's going to be all right by then. That's what I'm feeling. You know what I mean? Like, if they get in the top four, that's not going to be now. If they get in the top four, that's going to be because they win. You don't have to win loads of games to get in the top four either. The team that finishes fourth isn't the best Premier League team ever, is it? Like, you see like top teams fall over the line to get fourth. And yeah, if they were to kind of win a playoff in February and then play a proper Champions League knockout game in March, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, it's hard to see. But yeah, just the fact that they're there, they're going through the motions, they're doing what they need to do. It's pretty much the only thing you can do at the moment.
Yeah, Rory, Champions League, that's interesting. You mentioned it at the top. Do you think City are still in it for the Champions League?
Yeah, because as Sam says, though, by that stage, there is a loop element to an injury crisis that City will find it hard to escape from, just as any other team would. But by the business end of the Champions League, they should have the bulk of the players back. They will have lost time to make up for. Ironically, some of those players won't have played very much football. So I think it would be... There's a limited number of teams who can win the Champions League anyway, if we're all completely honest. There's maybe 3 from England, 2 from Spain, 1 from Germany and 1 from Italy, and maybe PSG. I don't know how seriously we're taking PSG at the moment. Brest have been amazing in the Champions League. They're not going to win
have.
it. So yeah, they are one of the 8 teams who can win the Champions League, is how I put it. But it might work out for them in terms of getting the players back, building up a head of steam, having a strong finish to the season. If I was Guardiola at the moment, he doesn't work like this, but I do. I would be thinking probably not going to win the league. It's relatively unlikely because, as we said before, like, you need 3 teams to not fall apart necessarily, but 3 teams to really hit the buffers, and 3 teams doing that is unlikely. Liverpool may well fall away, but Chelsea will be there to keep up the pace. And if Chelsea don't, then Arsenal do have a head start on City. But the Champions League's a little bit more of a lottery. I think the danger is, Sam's right, the playoff round in February, they are more likely than not to be in the playoff round rather than qualify automatically. They might still be feeling the effects of the injury problems then. They might not have got their confidence back. And that massive, mega, extendable flyleaf Champions League table is a mess. It doesn't look like it's supposed to look. There's lots of teams who are in very much the wrong position as far as Europe's elite football teams are concerned. So it may be that that playoff game is a lot harder than City would like it to be. It might be that they get Dinamo Zagreb and it's all fine. But I went to Bruges against Sporting last week. Bruges, who will, I think, qualify for the knockout, for the playoffs. Bruges are quite a good team, and City got them last in the group stage. I'm sure City will win that if they need to win that, but Bruges will give them problems, and teams of that ilk will give City problems if it's this City that turns up. If they get Real Madrid, then it's a different matter entirely. But yeah, if I was Guardiola, I would be thinking. Obviously, the FA Cup has not started yet for City, so that's always an option. But I'd also be looking at the Champions League and thinking that is probably your more realistic trophy route this season than the Premier League.
Okay, fantastic. Let's leave it there, City fans. You heard it there. Champions League or the FA Cup. Thanks, Rory. Thanks, Sam. Thank you so much for listening. We're back tomorrow.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.